I was born in a really interesting time with CF. Genentech had developed a drug called Pulmozyme that came out in sort of 1993, 1994. The first CF-specific drug, and I think there was a lot of optimism that my parents felt, but I think my parents did a great job of sort of shielding me from the realities of what the disease was going to bring to me. And sort of looking back at that time, what's actually really interesting is when my mom and dad started the foundation, they were about the same age that I am now. And like, I can't even imagine sort of what they were going through at that point in their lives. For the first sort of like 15 or so years of my life, and I had some typical ups and downs, and for those of you who don't know, the care for cystic fibrosis is extremely active and arduous. Like, it just revolves around nebulizers. So before school, most mornings, you're sitting there for an hour to an hour and a half tied to a nebulizer machine. In the old days, they used to pound my back to dislodge the mucus from my lungs, which sort of shifted to a mechanical vest over time. And then only as my health really started to cascade in my early 20s did I sort of really kind of understand like what I was dealing with. And so I graduated college in 2013, and like frankly at the time it sort of felt like it was going to be the only achievement that I was really ever going to have. I sort of remember getting home from school that year and having a very, very candid conversation with my doctor, who was telling me that we were running out of treatment options. And the reality is that I was dealing with pulmonary exacerbation after pulmonary exacerbation, and that is the material time of your life. It's 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 weeks of just dealing with the, suffocating from the inside. And she was the one, around that time, she said, the only path forward is if you have the courage to think about clinical trials. Yeah. And we were fortunate that around that time, sort of, the early 2010s, Vertex started to bring a lot of their assets into the clinic, from Kalydeco, Orkambi, Symdeko.
And by the way, some of those were funded by the Boomer Esiason.
So we contributed to the
the interesting thing is that in 2000, the National Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, led by Dr. Bob Bell, decided to create a thing called venture philanthropy.
Right.
And there were a number of people that were in and around him, financial people. And I'll never forget the COO, Rich Mattingly. He would always end his speeches wherever we were raising money about how money buys science and then science buys lives. That was his tagline to every speech. And it was ingrained with me when I was by myself talking about this. And then in 2000, they put together the Milestones for a Cure fundraise, where a lot of parents would go to these fundraising events and try to raise as much money. So of course, Joe O'Donnell, who was in Boston, and Joe lost his son to cystic fibrosis, but was still involved in the CF Foundation, calls me up and says, "Hey, we need $10 million." And I'm like, "Hey, I'm not Warren Buffett here. You know what I'm saying?" Hi, Warren. So I try to do as much fundraising as I possibly could, along with other families around the country. And we raised enough money to be able to put about $40 million and use it as leverage. And they invested in Aurora Biosciences out in San Diego. Yeah. And they did this high throughput screening, looking at every possible aspect of drug that could have an effect on cystic fibrosis. And this is where they landed on Vertex. And this is where Kalydeco came from. And, Gunnar had to deal with a lot of crap when he was a kid. And all I can tell you is I saw the great part of humanity, because all of his friends, all of his schools, everybody understood who he was. They knew that he was somewhat of a quasi-celebrity because he had cystic fibrosis, and there were special needs that were assigned to him. But him and his mom did not want to put him in a bubble. Yeah. We let him practice football or play football. He came to me, by the way, when he was 14 years old, and he says, "Dad, I want to play football." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know about this." And he goes, "I really want to play football." And I'm like, "Go ask your mother." So he took that as me saying yes. So he runs to his mother and says, "Dad said I could play football. I'm playing football." So
awesome.
Of course I caught holy hell. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, that investment in the biotechnology, the bioscience arena was really the impetus for where Gunnar is today.
In the rare disease space especially, patients are a finite resource, right? Like the drug development industry does not move forward without them. And so when I was offered the opportunity to be involved in a clinical trial, like the answer sort of very quickly became yes, not only for myself to get out of the hell that I was living in, but also to contribute to the broader CF community. Yeah. And so for a period of 4 or 5 years, I went from one failed trial to the next.
It didn't work at first.
Yeah, exactly. And it was just completely frustrating. And it's just devastating when you get the call from the research coordinator says, "Hey, the trial's being discontinued. You need to bring your study drug home, study drug back to the hospital system." But the shred of hope is an important human value, and sort of knowing that the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation had created this ecosystem, that we had sort of been at the forefront of trying to find something, to find anything, gave me enough hope to continue to think about putting myself into clinical trials. And so lo and behold, in April of 2018, actually it'll be 8 years ago next month, I dosed in the Trikafta study for Vertex, dosed the drug on a Monday. By Wednesday morning, I had woken up and everything was gone.
Meaning you could breathe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm actually living my American dream, is what it really feels like, right? Here we are 8 years later. In that time, I went off to business school. I got my MBA at Tuck. I now have a dream job in the biotech industry. And importantly, I have 2 kids, and I get to complain about how high my mortgage is, right? So the mundane realities of my life are really my American dream. And I think is very much proof positive to the will and effort that my parents put into all of this in the early 90s, when, to the point that he made, he saw the worst parts of cystic fibrosis when, he was doing hospital visits as the starting quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals.